Chapter 3 Corruption Living na Levo. Thieving as a social phenomena is one of the innumerable concomitants of capitalism. The entire development of capitalist society is accompanied by a tremendous growth in crimes of property. Great Soviet Encyclopedia. Very soon after my arrival in Russia, I found myself in Leningrad, staying at the Yevropeyskaya Hotel and frantically trying to locate a taxi. In Tourist had ordered one by phone, but with no visible results after 20 minutes. I was late for an appointment. I walked out on the street to look for a taxi stand, just as a Chaika limousine from the Admiralty rolled up and disgorged a delegation of high-ranking Soviet naval officers in blue and braid. They ran through the rain into the hotel with their briefcases and their chauffeur parked nearby. With nothing even remotely resembling a taxi in sight, I walked over to the Chaika to ask in rather unsteady Russian where to find taxis in that neighborhood. "Where do you want to go?" the driver asked. I explained it was another hotel, and I was mentally preparing to walk, wondering how long it would take. "Come on," he said, waving me into the Chaika. I ran to get my guide, and off we rode in the Admiralty's limousine, rather pleased with the tasseled curtains and the old-fashioned upholstery. "This is getting in na Levo," my Russian guide instructed, meaning that the driver was not just doing me a favor, but using the Navy's car to make some money for himself. Literally, na Levo means on the left, but comes across as on the side or under the table. "Doesn't he have to worry about those admirals coming back out?" I inquired. "They're probably having lunch at the hotel," she said. "He has time. Maybe they gave him time off for lunch, and he's using it to suit himself." At our destination, the chauffeur asked for a ruble, more than the meter fare, but as I soon learned, the minimum going rate for gypsy cab rides. The driver headed off away from the hotel, so perhaps he had other business in mind. Like any traveler who has just bumped into a character on the street offering to sell religious icons or change currency illegally, I presumed I had experienced one of those bits of petty commerce that the natives in many countries practice on tourists. There is plenty of that in Russia. The students trying to buy American records or mod clothes from you on the street, or the head waiter at a big-name Moscow restaurant who delivers the bill and whispers in your ear, "It's 72 rubles, but if you want to pay in dollars cash, it's 50. The businessman who actually took the risk of that bit of illegal legerdemain saved himself 46. And the waiter with dollars fetching 4 to 1 or better on the black market made about 130 rubles. But I presumed that this too was just the tourist trade. Nor did I give it much thought when a Moscow woman mentioned that a repairman who had come for what was supposed to be a preliminary inspection of her refrigerator offered to fix it right away, saving her months of waiting her turn, and then pocketed her 30 rubles for himself. But I began to appreciate the dimensions of the phenomenon when a chemist, whose thick glasses gave him a scholarly look, but who distilled vodka at his institute, told me that he had a small car for 5 years and never once took it to a gas station. The gasoline always came to him regularly Friday afternoons. The drivers of cars for state enterprises and government motor pools would visit areas where private car owners garaged their cars. They would siphon off gas from their tanks, gas bought by their agencies with subsidized government coupons. It intrigued me that this underground trade was so systemic, but my chemist friend said it was nothing special. Everyone is so used to that operation that when the drivers come by, you just hold up 2, 3, or 4 fingers for 20, 30, or 40 liters. The price for 76 octane is usually 40 liters for a ruble. The gas doesn't cost the driver a kopeck, so he makes a ruble profit, and it cost me only about 1/3 the regular price. I know one guy who has had a Moskvich for 11 years and must have bought 10,000 liters of gas, but never once had to go to the gas station. Nor was gasoline unique. All the car owners in his part of Moscow had another headache. Their brick garages had been built on naked earth without floors or foundations, and that area was very muddy, so they had to install cement floors for themselves, a task which I imagined as well nigh impossible given the difficulty of obtaining building supplies through normal state outlets, but the chemist said he had managed like the others. The easiest way is to go out on the ring road, the big circular highway around Moscow, pretend you need a ride, and wait for one of those big cement mixers, he said. There are plenty of them out there all the time. Pretty soon some driver will pick you up. You ride with him a while and tell him, "Look, I need some ready-mix cement. How much is it?" He nods, asks you how much you want, and you agree on a price. For me, the driver delivered it right to my garage. In a few minutes the deal was done. He had 10 rubles in his pocket. I had my cement, and there was still a lot left for his construction project. Nobody noticed, nobody cared. The concrete really doesn't belong to anyone anyway. On another occasion, Anne and I were having dinner with a young biologist, and we marveled at the good, freshly butchered beef that his wife had served. It was far better than the meat I had seen in state stores, but he said he had bought it at an ordinary state store for 320 rubles a kilo, about 60% over the fixed price. I asked how he had arranged it. "Very simple," he confided. "I have a butcher friend at the state store, near one of those skyscrapers that Stalin built. VIPs live there, so they get good supplies. In the afternoon, they usually get about 50 pounds of fresh beef. I go there and check with my friend to see if they have any good cuts left. If he says they do, I go to the cashier and pick up a receipt for 20 kopecks, regardless of how much meat I'm going to get. Then I carefully wrap a treshka, a 3-ruble note, the Russian equivalent of a $5 tip, inside the receipt, so that no one can see it. I get in line and hand in my 20 kopeck receipt with the treshka tucked inside, and my friend gives me a kilo of top-grade meat. I get the meat, he gets the treshka, and the state store gets the 20 kopecks. But where does the butcher get the meat, I inquired. Doesn't he have to go to account for it in the manager? Supposedly, but they just snip a bit here and a bit there from other customers, give them less than they are supposed to get, and little by little the butchers scrape together what they sell na Levo. They, I queried. I thought you said you had one butcher friend. Well, that's how it started, but now they all know me. They are all doing it. I think they have about 50 clients they take care of like me. How did you find out about them, about their being willing? A good friend of mine, a woman, took me and introduced me. She told the butcher, "This is my brother, take care of him," and then he laughed at the thought of it. So they take care of me like her brother. The people who are on the take are not always interested primarily in money, and they are not always engaged in illegal operations. They may simply be providing friends and good contacts with hard-to-get items. One night, Anne and I were enjoying a dinner of unusual fish delicacies and other special Russian zakuski, the hors d'oeuvres that are the heart of a Russian meal. more important than the entree, with Andrei Voznesensky and his wife Zoya when the phone rang. Andrei has an unusual phone. It twitters like a bird. He answered and chatted tautly at a great clip. Putting his hand over the receiver, he asked me at one point whether I knew how he could get 2 tickets for the final decisive game of the World Hockey Championships between Sweden and the Russians for the next night. It so happened that I had 2 extra tickets and had brought them to Andrei that night as a gift, but had not had a chance to tell him. He was delighted, told his friend, and hung up all smiles. I presumed that he himself was going with his friend, so I was disappointed to learn that he intended to give both tickets, very much prized in Moscow at that moment, to the lady on the phone. Never mind, he reassured me. It is much more important for me that this lady have the tickets as a gift. Do you know who she is? She is more important to us than the government. She is the director of one of the largest food stores in Moscow. She sells us our best food. She provided this whole meal which we are eating tonight. All these zakuski, which are impossible to get. You cannot pay her extra money for such things. She is terribly rich because so many people have already given her so much money. She does not need money anymore, but she is a fanatic hockey fan. She could only get 1 ticket to that game herself, so she gave it to her husband, but she needs 2 more because she wants to go with her lover. So it is a great thing if I can give her 2 hockey tickets. It is better than money. I am grateful to you. It is a great thing. Andrei, when he speaks English, emphasizes and draws out the word great, so that it comes out gret. I am grateful. It is a great thing. Sometimes it is not the highest officials, but the humblest, who are in a position to do the greatest favors. In the depth of winter, when fresh fruit disappears from Moscow tables, Irina, a television journalist, offered me a luscious plate of grapes, spilling over a few, slightly bruised, apples as we talked in her kitchen. When I raised an eyebrow, she told me that her friendly contact was an odd little fellow, Sasha, the fruit porter at a nearby fruit and vegetable store. Such jobs are so undesirable, she said, that management will put up with anyone willing to do that kind of menial labor. The technique at that store, Irina said, is that fruit shipments are largely written off by the manager as spoiled or bruised and no good for sale, regardless of their actual condition. Then Sasha privately peddles them to regular clients in nearby apartment buildings at the standard price plus a ruble. He keeps the ruble and half the price of the grapes for himself, she said, and the manager of the store gets the other half of the price. In my early months, I began to glimpse the broader dimensions of illicit trade in the Soviet Union through other encounters. In Baku, I met a young cab driver who told me that in his village it took a 500 ruble payoff to local police to get occupancy of a plot of ground and permission to build a private home there, and about 400 rubles to get a job as a cab driver in Baku. A workman told me he paid 50 rubles to the surgeon in a state hospital for operating on his legs after he fell down an elevator shaft, and a chauffeur said he paid 150 rubles to have 3 of his wife's teeth capped. A music store in Yerevan, Armenia, the clerk whispered to me that for 50 rubles above the set price, he could sell an imported accordion better than the one that I was examining in the display case. In Tbilisi, I was told it took a 13,000 ruble bribe to get into the medical institute. On a train, the head of a state farm explained to me the ruble and kopeck calculations for raising, fattening, slaughtering, and selling his private herd of sheep far above the legal quota. The personal operation that intrigued me most of all, however, involved an engineer who had swiped enough spare parts at a large automobile plant to construct himself a complete camping trailer, an unheard of and practically non-existent luxury in Russia. A balding linguist who knew the engineer personally told me that this engineer had assembled his trailer piece by piece right on the premises of the Zell factory in Moscow, which manufactures luxury limousines for the Politburo. Presumably, other workers were either in on the operation or thought the trailer was being constructed for some VIP and discretion required to keep quiet about it. Somehow it went undiscovered, but the engineer was not without his problems. Several weeks ago I was talking with him, and he was worried that he was not going to be able to get the trailer out of the factory. The linguist told me, this is because each factory has guards and watchmen checking against larceny of state property from the premises. The engineer was worried that he would not be able to find the right guard to bribe to let him get out of the plant with his trailer, but a couple of weeks later I saw him again, and he told me that finally he had gotten the trailer to his dacha. He had found the right guy. Corruption and illegal private enterprise in Russia, creeping capitalism as some Russians playfully call it, grow out of the very nature of the Soviet economy and its inefficiencies, shortages, poor quality goods, terrible delays in service. They constitute more than a black market as Westerners are accustomed to thinking of it, for parallel to the official economy, there exists an entire thriving counter-economy which handles an enormous volume of hidden or semi-hidden trade that is indispensable for institutions as well as individuals. Practically any material or service can be arranged na Levo, from renting a holiday cottage in the country, buying a raincoat or a pair of good shoes in a state store, getting a smart dress made by a good seamstress, transporting a sofa across town, having the plumbing fixed or soundproofing installed on your apartment door, being treated by a good dentist, sending your children to a private play school, arranging home consultation with a top-flight surgeon, to erecting buildings and laying pipe in a collective farm. This counter-economy has become an integral part of the Soviet system, a built-in permanent feature of Soviet society. It encompasses everything from petty bribing, black marketing, wholesale thieving from the state, and underground private manufacturing, all the way up to a full-fledged Godfather operation, which was exposed and led to the downfall of a high Communist Party figure, a candidate member of the Politburo. It operates on an almost Oriental scale, and with a brazen normality that would undoubtedly incense the original Bolshevik revolutionaries. Yet ordinary people take it for granted as an essential lubricant for the rigidities of the planned economy. What the elite get legally through their special stores and system of privileges, ordinary people are forced to seek illegally in the country's counter-economy. It's what helps keep our socialism human, smiled my chemist friend. Once I asked Andrei Sakharov, the Nobel Prize-winning dissident physicist, about the size of the counter-economy, and he estimated it involved certainly 10% or more of the gross national product, or something like 50 billion rubles. I have heard both higher and lower guesses. Professional Soviet economists, even those who acknowledge privately that its scope is tremendous, won't venture a figure. It is very big, especially in the retail trade sector, but statistics on it cannot be serious. No one can know precisely, observed a former Moscow State University professor of economics, a recent immigrant. No one, however, denies the existence of the counter-economy. The press runs many articles about corruption, thieving, and illegal profiteering, though characteristically it never publishes broad statistics that would portray the overall dimensions of underground operations, but there are always several publicized each year in which economic criminals against the state are sentenced to death for operations that run into the hundreds of thousands of rubles and occasionally top a million. The death penalty for economic crimes was reinstituted in 61, obviously because the problem was getting more serious. In 66, one press report revealed that 1/4 of all crimes in the country involved misappropriation of state property. In September of 72, Pravda disclosed that there had been more than 200 cases of large-scale theft from the state in the Russian Republic, about half the population in a recent period, and that more than half of the most serious cases had been long-term operations run by crime syndicates. So serious is the problem that the Ministry of Internal Security has a special branch known as the Department for the Struggle Against Plundering of Socialist Property, operating nationwide. Not only has this agency failed to lick the problem, but Russians I knew talked of unpublicized cases where agents had been bought off like narcotic squad men in the West, subverted by dope racketeers. In addition, press accounts indicate that in many cases the elaborate array of supposed checks and controls at warehouses, factories, farms, and a slew of other organizations failed because the controllers were part of the conspiracy. Corruption is not new, of course. Even under strictest Stalinism, Russians told me it went on. To wit, the death penalty for economic crimes was first imposed in 32 by Stalin during the forced collectivization and forced industrialization, and lifted only after the war in 47. But Russians insisted that it had risen sharply as Soviet society became more affluent. In the late 60s and 70s, one Westerner with old friends in Moscow told me how he had come back in 72 after a long absence and asked one couple what had been the biggest change in the past decade. With one voice they exclaimed, "The corruption. It has grown enormously," complained the husband. "You don't know what our corruption has become," shuddered his smartly tailored wife. "Before it was mostly people doing favors for each other, ballet tickets for cigarettes, a bit of caviar for the dressmaker. Now everything cost money, real money," and she rubbed her thumb over her forefingers in that international gesture for cash. The Soviet counter-economy has its own lore and lingo, its channels and conventions, understood by all and employed by practically everyone on an almost daily basis. Its mutations and permutations are innumerable, but the most common and innocent variety is what the Russians call blot, influence connections pulling strings. In an economy of chronic shortages and carefully parceled out privileges, blot is an essential lubricant of life. The more rank and power one has, the more blot one normally has. But actually, almost everyone can bestow the benefits of blot on someone else. A doorman, a railroad car porter, a cleaning lady in a food store, a sales clerk, an auto mechanic, or a professor, because each has access to things or services that are hard to get and that other people want or need. Blot begins to operate when someone asks someone else a favor with the understanding of eventually doing a favor in return. Technically, blot does not involve money. Blot isn't really corruption, an actress contended. It's just time in ya tebe, you for me and me for you. In other words, I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine. Almost any transaction can work po blatu, by connections or through acquaintances, po znakомству. As the Russians say, from the hockey tickets that Andrei Volnesensky passed on to the food store director as a favor, to a general's getting a professor to give his son a good grade on a university entrance examination, and the professor's getting the general to arrange a draft deferment for his son, a real case. The actress mentioned above wanted to get her boy enrolled in a children's swimming club class. Her son was not much of an athlete and had not passed the test, so she was eager to get her hands on a copy of Playboy as blot for the coach. In another case, a Ukrainian lady landed a job in the Bulgarian consulate in Kiev through blot. The only problem, she told friends, was that some acquaintances started avoiding her because they assumed that any Soviet citizen employed by a foreign embassy or business also worked for the secret police, and this made them wary of her unjustly, she said. Olga, a young secretary whom I knew, got a free ride on Aeroflot to many points in the Soviet Union through blot. One of her classmates in school had become an Aeroflot dispatcher in charge of passenger lists on certain domestic flights. When Olga got the itch to travel, she would check with her dispatcher friend about upcoming flights and destinations, and on the appointed day, the dispatcher would put Olga at the head of the line of passengers waiting to board the selected flight. Even without a ticket, Olga would get one of the first seats. If the plane were filled or had an overflow, a regular occurrence, the dispatcher would tell the hapless souls at the end of the line that someone had mistakenly overbooked the flight, and they would have to wait for the next one. This happens so often that while it causes aggravation, it doesn't raise a scandal. Olga was never checked for a ticket, thanks to her friend. I never learned what she gave the dispatcher in return, though it must have been something good. But blot is only the tip of the iceberg. Bribery is just as widespread. What the Arabs call bakshish, Mexicans call mordida, Americans call greasing the palm, Russians call vizayaka, literally the take. It's the most common form is the ubiquitous price scalping by lowly paid 80 to 120 monthly sales clerks in Soviet stores and the tips paid to service people. As a computer specialist said to me, no one can live on his regular pay. You know, in Odessa they have a saying that if you get really mad at another person, you can put a curse on him. Let him live on his salary. It's a terrible fate. No one can imagine it. As I mentioned earlier, one of my first impressions in Moscow was that people were better dressed than I had anticipated, but when I began comparing what they wore with what was actually on sale in stores, the two didn't jibe. Obviously, there was more to shopping than met the eye. It was the under-the-counter bribery of sales clerks for those desirable and perennially scarce items that Russians call deficit goods. The custom is simply for the sales clerks to stash away a portion of any shipment of attractive deficit items and sell them off surreptitiously to steady customers who have either left a bribe in advance or can be counted on to pay a premium on delivery. 10 to 15 rubles on a 60 ruble raincoat is standard. So common is this practice that the Soviet press is always flailing away at it vainly. I remember an article in Leninist Banner, the provincial newspaper for towns around Moscow, in February 73, exposing a typical case of price scalping at the unusually well-provisioned Chaika store in Shelikovo, a suburb for select space technicians, scientists, and defense workers. In one check, The paper said investigators found illicit scalping in 35 Tbilisi goods: fur hats, fur collars, Alaska brand women's boots, wet look shoes and boots, sweaters, Icelandic plaid blankets, handkerchiefs from Orenburg, wool rugs, gloves, tea sets, briefcases, mohair scarves, and so on. Lampooning this practice, Krokodil, the Soviet humor magazine, once did a takeoff on a floor walker promoting some newly arrived items. Dear customers, in the leather goods department of our store, a shipment of 500 imported women's purses has been received. 450 of them have been bought by employees of the store. 49 are under the counter and have been ordered in advance for friends. One purse is in the display window. We invite you to visit the leather department to buy this purse. The black market begins where price scalping leaves off, because, as Crocodile suggested, clerks themselves buy Tbilisi items and then illegally retail them on their own time, or else customers hoard choice items and then resell them. The press is always thundering at these speculators. So normal is this practice that people take it as routine to have to pay 4 or 5 rubles for an ordinary 2-ruble theater ticket, and how a hot show cost far more. One young man told me he had bought a pair of knee boots for his sister, though through a speculant who had paid the state price of 60 rubles, plus a 20-ruble tip for the clerk, and then charged him 140 rubles. Students who get discounts on travel fares profiteer on the resale of their subsidized tickets, but the operations are often more substantial, like the woman who had bought up 200 scarves, 800 handkerchiefs, and a load of sweaters through contacts at state stores, and was finally arrested for marketing them from suitcases at the open-air market in Dushanbe, or the ring that was selling rabbit fur hats for 30 rubles, state price 11 rubles, and blue minx coats at 500 rubles, state price 260. The black market has no single locus. Often it is simply the apartment of either the buyer or seller. As a person-to-person operation, it is literally nowhere and everywhere, but segments of it do have established sites. One Moscow woman told me that the most active black market in lipsticks and cosmetics in Moscow was in the women's public toilets down a side street from the Bolshoi Theater. This became a favorite spot for hustlers because male police officers could not intrude. The black market in imported shortwave radios, cassette recorders, and hi-fi equipment, I discovered, centers spasmodically on the Sadovo Ring Road, in front of the second-hand commission shop specializing in electronic goods. In a small Moscow park near the statue of Ivan Fyodorov, the first printer in Russian history, is the black market in books, both legal and samizdat, or self-published underground books. While I was in Moscow, a samizdat version of Zelensky's Cancer Ward fetched up to 100 rubles there, and a 3-volume Western edition of the complete poetry of the late Anna Akhmatova brought 200 rubles. Some books printed in Russian itself command huge markups because they come out in limited editions that do not begin to satisfy demand. I remember the sensation in late '73 over a 1-volume collection of 3 novels by the late Mikhail Bulgakov, including Master and Margarita, his satire of Stalinist Russia. Officially, 30,000 copies were printed, but 26,000 are reported to have been sent abroad for sale. To impress you Westerners with how liberal we are, groused one writer, the 4,000 copies left in Russia were gone overnight, but I was told that the publishing house had actually printed, sub rosa, 900 extra copies, which insiders sold at a staggering profit. The book's official price was 1.53 rubles, but the black market prices ran from 60 to 200 rubles. In Moscow, however, the two most prolific sources of high-quality black market goods are the travelers who go west on sports teams, in ballet troupes, and on official delegations, and come home laden with all kinds of goods from the capitalist West, on which they can make a hefty profit, and the network of Beryozka hard currency stores, to which some Russians have access through foreign earnings, diplomats, specialists who go abroad to work, writers who get foreign royalties, people receiving gifts from relatives abroad, or through the privilege of special pay bonuses in certificate rubles. The Beryozka stores are an open invitation to black market profiteering because of their cut-rate prices on scarce items. Buying in the Beryozka and selling on the black market has a guaranteed multiplier effect like buying stocks on margin, but without any risk. A Jewish scientist who received money from abroad told me that in late '74, for example, brightly colored Japanese umbrellas were a very hot item. They cost 4 certificate rubles at the Beryozka and sold for 40 rubles on the street. When a shipment of Italian-made super rifle jeans came in, he said they cost 7.5 rubles in the Beryozka and sold for 75 or 80 rubles on the black market. The markup is not always so steep, but it is enough for top-grade certificate rubles. There are several categories to be selling at as much as 8 to 1 against ordinary rubles. One special wrinkle of the Soviet counter-economy is the gray market that exists in all sorts of goods, especially the gray market in used cars, which sell for more than new cars. Throughout the country, the state has set up commission shops which market second-hand items and everything from electronic goods or clothing to potted plants. These state-run stores set a price for each item and take a 7% fee for handling the sale. When it comes to cars, the state prices are so low, given the vast pent-up demand, the long wait for new cars, and the fact that many people are never able to get on lists for new cars anyway, and must settle for buying a used one. This has produced the gray market, the double-tiered set of prices at car commission shops, the state fixed prices, and the price actually agreed upon by the individual buyer and seller. With a friend, I went one overcast October afternoon to the Moscow used car market to see how it worked. It was a shabby, muddy field, littered with cement blocks from a nearby construction site, and swarming with cars of various makes and vintages, from a little old Moshkovich to brand new Zhiguli sedans, or a black Mercedes-Benz and a tired '68 Ford Fairlane, both bought years before from departing diplomats through a Soviet government agency. Little knots of people gathered around various cars to inspect them or dicker with the owners who sell their own cars. I watched one transaction unfold. It was a commercial flirtation over a battered old yellow Moskvich, a compact in which the Russians somehow managed to squeeze 4 people, between a pretty dark-haired woman and a young man with a goatee. In any other country or setting, you would have thought they were bargaining over something else. She, the owner, sat in the car, window rolled down. and answered his quiet questioning and gave him a gentle come on. Her commercial teasing aroused the interest of a few onlookers. He walked around the car and she got out to preen it, rubbing the windshield clean with a soft rag. Coquettishly, she moved away, wiping a fender and then the headlights while he pursued her, still asking questions, looking at the car, lightly kicking the tires. Finally, they both got in the car, talked a couple of minutes, and drove off. "This is the most important moment," my Russian friend coached me. "The excuse for driving away is that the buyer wants to test the car, but they both want to get rid of unwanted attention and negotiate privately on the price. Officially, price speculation is illegal, but it is an open secret that practically no one buys or sells a used car for the price set by state appraisers, even though the Moscow used car market is seeded with police informers posing as prospective buyers. Once the real price is struck during that drive around the block, usually several thousand rubles over the state price, buyer and seller return to the field and go through the motions of getting the state's evaluation and filling official documents, all of which takes 3 days before the car changes hands. I have no idea what the dark-haired woman got for her Moskvich, but the asking prices on other cars may give a clue. The Ford Fairlane and the Mercedes-Benz were each asking 20,000 rubles, despite high mileage. More amazing to me, no one batted an eye when one well-dressed couple appeared with a new white Ziguli 3 sedan, its interior still swathed in protective plastic sheeting, and only 493 kilometers on its speedometer, and asked 12,000 rubles, a markup of 4,500 rubles from the new car price. I knew a scholar who had gotten 12,000 rubles for an old Volga sedan, which had cost him only 5,500 rubles, new, in which he had driven nearly 50,000 miles. Two Muslim brothers from Azerbaijan, planning to use it as a profitable gypsy cab, were delighted to get it at any price. They practically flew in the windows in excitement, my friend recalled. They never looked under the car or checked anything. In 3 minutes, they bought an old car for the price of 2 new Cadillacs, without driving or testing it. They could hardly speak Russian or understand it, and they bought the car. One of them asked me, "Please drive us to our hotel." I had a driver's license, but I'm afraid to drive the car in Moscow. My friend obliged them. Like the used car market, moonlighting is another sprawling component of the counter-economy, which shades from the gray into the black market. Technically, it is legal for Russians to engage in some limited private translating, typing, tutoring, or renting an apartment room to vacationers or lodgers, provided income taxes are paid and the prices and scale of operations are modest, but the practice has long since exceeded those bounds and the profits are surprising. An engineer in Moscow told me of a lady across the hall, a language teacher whose pay at an institute was no rubles a month, but who could earn 500 to 600 rubles a month coaching high school students, cramming for college entrance examinations. Notices posted on bulletin boards all over Moscow indicate how large is the private sector in tutoring. Word even got around of one ambitious tutor with a flair for self-promotion and a good position in an educational establishment, who told a gathering of 500 prospective examination candidates about his services and signed up more than 4,000 rubles worth of business on the spot. The attraction of such tutors, parents say, is that they are geared toward results and avoid the stiff, uninteresting, repetitious lessons given at Soviet schools. "We teach them what is not taught at school to think," bragged one tutor. The coming of the private car, like the competition for university places among a middle class with some money to spare, has given real impetus to another realm of illicit service operations. Stories of taxi drivers or chauffeurs of state cars swiping gasoline or spare parts to sell at a killing or legion. Anyone with mechanical skill to boot is in constant demand. I was told of an auto mechanic who used to supplement his regular monthly pay of 200 rubles with at least 700 to 800 rubles a month in private auto repair work. He made so much money that he could afford private tutoring for university entrance examinations for both his sons, an engineer told me. One boy had to be tutored in 3 subjects: math, physics, and English. It is very expensive to pay for private lessons like that for several months. It cost the mechanic over 1,000 rubles for that one boy. But he was making enough himself na Levo to afford it. The list of services provided by the shabashniki, as Russians call moonlighters, is endless. Women eager for the kind of flair or fashion in their clothes that Soviet industry has not learned to provide will get hold of material and go to a private dressmaker or bribe a seamstress in a state-run shop to copy a pattern or a picture from a Western magazine. Some intellectual and elite families send their children to discreetly operated private nurseries. Solzhenitsyn and the literary critic Andrei Sinyavsky used one for their children. I knew of a dentist for a famous international artistic troupe who had a thriving private practice. In his apartment, which he had furnished with equipment painstakingly removed from his regular clinic and reassembled at home, unlike dentists in state polyclinics who drill without Novocaine and pull teeth at the sight of a serious cavity, this man took gentle care of patients. He can really cap a tooth nicely, or make false teeth, or a bridge. I was told by an American woman who went to him on the sly. Prices in the counter-economy can be fairly steep. Murray Fromson, a CBS correspondent, once hired a freelance Soviet cameraman to do some work on the side and was stunned at the fee demanded by this private operator, 3 rubles for each frame that he shot. It's the spirit of free enterprise, the Soviet photographer said in self-defense. Yeah, without the spirit of competition. Fromson countered, in a free market you'd price yourself right out of business. It was amazing to me, however, how many people got into the act, how much money was circulating in the counter-economy, and how many people, desperate for timely service or decent workmanship, would happily turn to Levoki, the people who operate na Levo. So shoddy is Soviet housing construction, for example, that repairs are commonly required for brand new apartments. On occasion I have seen press articles suggesting that workmen deliberately did a poor job hanging doors and installing windows, left leaky plumbing, failed to connect light switches, doorbells, and the like, just in order to return and offer their private services at a price. In what was probably a modest estimate, Literary Gazette, the Writers' Union Weekly, reported that in Moscow, alone new apartment owners had paid out at least 10 million rubles one year to illicit operators for basic repairs. That figure only begins to hint at the dimensions of the illegal operations and the extent to which people depend on them. For stories come to light periodically in the press indicating that not only individuals turn to the counter-economy for service, but so do collective farms or industrial plants. Literary Gazette carried a report in mid-74 about 2 collective farm chairmen who had been convicted of buying stolen property from illegal operators, not for their private profit, but merely to try to fulfill the economic targets of their farms. one badly needed apple crates, and the other was desperate for pipes for a cowshed, and neither could get what he needed on time from the normal state sector. Farms and enterprises also turn to private construction gangs to meet deadlines they cannot otherwise fulfill. This practice, I was told, is especially widespread in Siberia and the north, where even with hardship pay bonuses, companies find it hard to hold regular workers. Although officials are supposed to observe rules for hiring stray workers, press reports and private comments of Russians make it clear that work crews, which are in effect little private companies, often sign contracts with state farms, enterprises, or construction agencies to put up certain buildings, lay piping or asphalt roads by a given deadline for a fixed price. These gangs have a reputation for working longer hours and much more rapidly than the regular construction crews, which are notorious for slack work, cost overruns, and time lags. Usually, it is the small-time operations of the counter-economy that Russians talk about from their own experience, but occasionally the press exposes large-scale Soviet corruption. In 1973, newspapers reported one ring that had misappropriated 260,000 rubles worth of textiles and fabrics in Lithuania, another which had illegally marketed 650,000 rubles of fruit juice in Azerbaijan, and a third which had stolen 700,000 rubles worth of gems from Moscow diamond cutting enterprise. In early 1975, another group went on trial in Moscow, and its leader was sentenced to death for a sub-Rosa trade operation that netted about 2 million rubles. The key figure, Mikhail Leviev, manager of the Tajikistan shop on Gorky Street, was accused of bribing state inspectors to understate the value of silks, wines, and specialty foods from the Tajik Republic, which his store marketed at steep prices, and he kept the difference. But the prize example of the black market operations, the one that combines all the ingredients of the counter-economy, from thieving, phony bookkeeping to manufacturing, sales, and distribution, is the complete underground private industry. Here and there they come to light. In 1972, an entire plant in Bashkiria was uncovered making plastic goods, tablecloths, women's summer shoes, and other items. 2 years later, the press wrote up a gang in Odessa operating an illegal fur factory that siphoned off raw furs from the state and produced chick garments sold for very handsome profits. Nothing in recent years, however, has matched the sensational scandal over underground industry in Soviet Georgia. Life in Tbilisi, the Georgian capital, has a Latin flavor all its own. In its people, its mood, and mores, it is much closer to the Mediterranean world than to Moscow. The streets of Tbilisi are more often named for poets than for commissars. In the soft evenings, dark-eyed Georgians stroll languidly along Rustaveli Avenue, and in the morning heat workmen water down the dusty central squares. Narrow, hilly cobblestone roads wind like dry riverbeds under the iron-grilled balconies of the old quarters, evoking the back streets of Beirut or Algiers. Modish young men motion foreigners in the pastry shops or hairdressing salons to offer 50 rubles for a pair of wing-tipped English walking shoes, or 30 rubles for a bright shirt. Evening crowds stop to stare at police chasing youths through moving traffic, and unlike Russians, no one makes an effort to cooperate with authority. One catches the unmistakable scent of Sicilian unruliness. In 1893, an anonymous French traveler recorded that the city had 126 tailors, 104 bootmakers, 40 barbers, 4 master goldsmiths, 5 clockmakers, 16 painters, and 8 balalaika players, testifying to the Georgian taste for finery and good living. Even in the Soviet era, Tbilisi has flaunted a conspicuous consumption that somehow seemed indecent for this socialist commonwealth. The tailors are still producing expensive clothes, and Georgians will consume half a case of wine, singing their mountain songs in downtown restaurants. Impulsively, they send gift bottles to strangers who catch their eye. At a hotel buffet, Bob Kaiser of the Washington Post and I were once sent brandy at breakfast as a gesture of hospitality. Among the Soviets, Georgians have a reputation for paying the biggest bribes to store clerks for defensive goods, bidding the highest prices for used cars, renting private rooms at the old Sandanovsky baths in Moscow, and banqueting like grandees on special succulent lamb, shashlik flown in with servants on an illicitly chartered plane from Tbilisi. The hook-nosed Georgian farmer in flat cap and little comb mustache is a fixture in the farmers' market of Moscow and other northern cities, marketing tropical fruits or jauntily demanding a ruble apiece for flowers flown up to Moscow in midwinter in his suitcases. The Russians tell the joke about a little Georgian who was on an Aeroflot airliner bound for Moscow when a hijacker broke into the cockpit, brandished a pistol, and demanded that the plane go to London. The pilot changed course, and soon a second hijacker with 2 guns burst in and ordered the pilot to head for Paris. Another change of course. Finally, the wiry little olive-skinned Georgian entered with a bomb and declared, "Take this plane to Moscow or I'll blow it up." The pilot agreed and changed course a third time. When they landed in Moscow, the first 2 hijackers were carted off to jail, and the little Georgian was congratulated by a high-level delegation. "Tell us, comrade," said one slightly incredulous dignitary, "why did you divert the plane from Paris back to Moscow?" "What was I going to do with 5,000 carnations in Paris?" the Georgian replied. In the 2 decades since the death of Stalin, who was born in Georgia, the Kremlin tolerated the idiosyncrasies of the quick-tempered, warm-hearted, wine-drinking Georgians. When I first went there in the fall of '71, having heard rumors of underground millionaires from Soviet friends, these were stoutly denied by Georgian officials. One Soviet journalist told me he had visited a Georgian who lived in a palatial residence with a marble staircase and backyard swimming pool. In Tbilisi, a slender scholar talked of illegal factories producing carpets, textile goods, eye shades, and beachwear, but Miss Victoria Siradiz, then an officious, auburn-haired deputy premier of the Georgian Republic, dismissed all this as scurrilous innuendo. "We don't have millionaires," she insisted firmly to me in an interview. "It is our collective farmers who are millionaires." But on my next visit, 10 months later, the mood had changed, and so had the party line. People were talking about the chistka, literally the cleaning, the purge that was shaking the Georgian way of life to its foundations, and was exposing underground wealth and at least one well-known millionaire. Actually, the investigations had been underway when I had seen Miss Siradez, led by her closest political patron. The Kremlin had finally tired of the free-wheeling Georgian style of commerce, evidently because it had actually disrupted the normal fulfillment of Georgian economic goals set by Moscow. As the new party chief in Georgia, the Politburo picked a former cop, Interior Minister Eduard Shevardnadze, a man of Cromwellian restitute. On my way in from the airport in 72, a cabbie told me, "The new boss is tough. He likes order. He won't let the speculanti get away with so much. He will give everyone a warning," and then he trailed off with a meaningful shake of the head. Later I heard that Shevardnadze had begun by summoning all the cabinet ministers together, asking them to raise their left arms, and then with their expensive imported gold wristwatches showing, ordered them to toss these symbols of Burgess living into the center of the table to signal the start of a new era. But the kingpins, the man who turned out to be the Soviet version of the Godfather, was an unlikely former chauffeur and one-time economic student who had not finished university, named Atari Lashvili. Since the late 60s, Lashvili had built up a network of underground private enterprises in cahoots with other businessmen and had amassed a fortune. Several Russians told me he had such high connections with the former party boss of the Republic, Vasily Mezhvanadze, that he and his business cohorts could arrange hiring and firing of Republican ministers and high party officials in the city of Tbilisi, and even party secretaries for the entire Republic of Georgia, the highest officials in the region, although he masked himself modestly as the head of a small experimental synthetics laboratory. The Soviet newspaper Trud said, Lashvili was an underground millionaire who laid tables for 1,000 rubles at restaurants in Moscow, Kiev, and Alma-Ata on the occasion of victories of his favorite soccer team, and who had 2 dachas with swimming pools, one near Tbilisi and another on the Black Sea coast in Abkhazia. Trud, the trade union newspaper, disclosed that Lashvili and his cohorts, 82 of them, were indicted in one case, had swindled the state out of 1.7 million rubles worth of goods. Using the lab as a blind, the ring catered to Soviets willing to pay high prices for scarce consumer items. It produced turtleneck sweaters, scarves, plastic raincoats, beach slippers, and colored nylon net bags that are a must with most Soviet shoppers. In reality, it was a private concern called Lashvili and Company, said Trud. At the time of the investigation, police found more than 100,000 rubles worth of artificial leather, jackets, sweaters, knitwear, and other goods on the premises, none registered in government documents. Later stories revealed that at least 3 other factories were operating, one in a mountain hideaway and 2 others within regular industrial enterprises in Tbilisi. The basic technique, as the Soviet press explained it, was for the private entrepreneurs to take advantage of slipshod planning to bilk the state out of the raw materials needed for their production. For example, one factory was supposed to be producing nylon bags, each requiring 14 ounces of synthetic material, when in fact only about 1 ounce was actually needed per bag. The rest went for contraband goods. The established state production norms could be met easily in one shift, but the shop worked a second shift secretly. It even acquired 5 extra machines to increase output. Lashvili's undoing was evidently a slowly developing blood feud with Shevardnadze that began years before Shevardnadze became the party boss in 72. In the old days, Lashvili was a frequent guest of Mezhvanadze, the former party boss installed under Nikita Khrushchev. Mezhvanadze, an alternate member of the Politburo in Moscow, was known as a hard-drinking, high-living, vain, weak-willed leader, much influenced by his wife, who had a reputation for welcoming expensive furs, jewels, and many other extravagant gifts from businessmen, ministers, and officials. In Moscow, I was told by party members and people with good party connections that Medvedev and his wife had become millionaires several times over during his 19-year tenure as party boss in Georgia. In his heyday, Lajivili allegedly numbered the party chiefs of the city of Tbilisi as his protégés. At one point, he is said to have tried to arrange the removal of his nemesis, Shevardnadze, from a key party job from which he was beginning to harass Lajivili's underground industrial empire. Ultimately, however, Shevardnadze, a tall, slender, handsome apparatchik with a modest lifestyle, mousetrapped one of Lajivili's accomplices with a forged lottery ticket and arrested the man when he went to pick up the prize, a new Volga car. Despite appeals to high patrons in Moscow, Lajivili was ultimately arrested and convicted, though his sentencing in February 73 contained an open hint that he still wielded influence with the Georgian courts, whereas much smaller fry elsewhere had been sentenced to death for more modest economic manipulations. Lajivili got only 15 years. With the Godfather out of the way, the purge swept all kinds of party and government officials out of office and a few mid-level officials into jail. The Soviet press published revised economic statistics revealing how disastrously Georgia had performed in years past and how riddled the economy was by corruption, according to Roy Medvedev, the dissident Marxist historian who has made a career of studying party affairs. The new Georgian prosecutor wanted to go after Shevardnadze, the former party boss, dropped from the Politburo in September 72, although Medvedev said there was more than enough evidence to warrant searches of the Shevardnadze apartment on Tbilisi's Tony Barnov Street and his luxurious country houses at the resorts of Pitsunda, Ikhidnit, and Likhani. The Kremlin leadership blocked the investigation. The case was hushed up. Drawing the obvious contrast with Watergate, Medvedev noted that in the Soviet Union, interference by party leaders in criminal prosecutions is not considered a crime in our country. Party officials, he said, are investigated only with the approval of their superiors. This actually happens considerably more than outsiders realize. Investigations and trials of party officials are held in secret so as not to sully the party's public image. A Soviet journalist informed me, for example, of a secret trial for important party officials in the Voroshilovgrad province on corruption charges in late 73, leading ultimately to the forced retirement of the party boss of that province, Vladimir Shevchenko. But in such cases, Soviet insiders say, the principal motive is not usually an urge to wipe out corruption within the party, but internal political feuding among rival party factions. In the Voroshilovgrad case, the journalist said Vladimir Shcherbitsky, the Ukrainian party chief, had long been looking for a way to remove Shevchenko, an important member of a rival faction, and corruption provided a useful pretext. Many other cases of corruption within the party go unpunished, according to party members. They have become so bold and open about it. A party member from the northern city, a woman engineer, complained to a friend of mine, in our city the party chiefs just call the fur factory and order fur coats sent over to them for nothing. Another well-placed Muscovite said that the official in charge of the special stores for the Moscow party apparatus had become a millionaire through illicit trade. The most celebrated case during my tour in Moscow involved Yekaterina Furtezva, the Minister of Culture, once a favorite of Khrushchev. During his leadership, she had become the only woman in Soviet history ever to become a member of the Politburo, then known as the Presidium. For years after Khrushchev's removal, reports circulated about efforts to get rid of her because she had been a Khrushchev holdover, but she hung on to her ministry, energetic, capable, hard-drinking, rough-talking, alternately hard and moderate in cultural affairs. Then, in the spring of '74, word seeped out that she was slipping and would lose her seat in the Supreme Soviet. Long an automatic post for her, and possibly her ministry. The pretext was a scandal over an expensive dacha, costing about 120,000 rubles, which she had built in the elite dacha country for her grown daughter Svetlana, already Miss Fertezva, and her husband, Deputy Foreign Minister Nikolai Firyubin, had two dachas, one in Moscow suburbs and another on the Black Sea. What raised the scandal first among workmen for the Moscow Construction Trust that built the new dacha, and later in party circles, was not the fact that this was her third dacha, but that she had paid wholesale cut-rate prices for the construction materials, and that she was building it openly in her daughter's name, passing on the perquisites of power to the next generation too brazenly to suit some party officials. One version I heard was that the director of the construction trust had gone along with the cut-rate costs because he felt beholden to Miss Fertetseva ever since he had won an important state prize while she was chief of the Moscow party organization in the mid-50s. As the gossip spread, the party leadership reportedly decided that she should pay the full price of the dacha by reimbursing the state about 60,000 rubles, a sum that she managed to produce within a couple of days, itself a startling indication of the substantial wealth accumulated by some high officials. Despite the reimbursement, private reports persisted that Miss Fertetseva would be forced out of her cabinet post. When news of the scandal hit the foreign press, she was said to have gone twice to Brezhnev to plead for her job, at least until after the formal installation of the new cabinet in June of '74. As predicted, Miss Fertetseva did lose her seat in the Supreme Soviet, but her appeals to Brezhnev and the implications of the scandalous publicity abroad evidently persuaded the Kremlin to retain her as Minister of Culture rather than openly admit the scandal by dropping her. She died in office in October of '74. Setting aside such sensational cases of abusing official positions, only a small part of operations of the Soviet counter-economy would be considered criminal in the West. To be sure, the Soviet Union has embezzlers, car theft rings, prostitutes, narcotic traffickers, armed bank robbers, and an occasional band of extortionists, posing as police units complete with uniforms, handcuffs, and documents, shaking down the innocent, offenders who would be criminals anywhere, but much of the private hustling on the black market would not be illegal if Soviet communist doctrine permitted the kind of small private trade sector that exists legally under Hungarian, Polish, or East German brands of communism. For most operations na Levo, as one venturesome newspaper commentary in Komsomolskaya Pravda in October '74 dared to imply, the system is at fault for not meeting the basic needs of consumers. Occasionally, but only very occasionally, evidence surfaces that someone in the party hierarchy is toying with legalizing some aspect of the current na Levo private enterprise. In March of '71, in his major report to the 24th Party Congress, Brezhnev said it was necessary to consider creating conditions so that certain people, either at home in an individual capacity or forming themselves in cooperatives, could take up some work in the field of service. 16 months later, an article in the Literary Gazette suggested that the Russians could learn from East Germany, Hungary, and Poland to permit individuals certain freedom of action in the sphere of services. The author had in mind small shops, cafes, dressmaking emporiums, little restaurants and repair shops, but nothing came of the idea that activity remains on the wrong side of the law. Strangely, for all its protestations about corruption, the regime seems to have ambivalent feelings toward the counter-economy. Any system so intent on centralized control is bound to regard as anathema activities carried on independently of its own planners and regulations. The authorities are genuinely dismayed by the huge losses of state property and the amount of time people obviously take away from their jobs to engage in illegal moonlighting during working hours. The party worries about the moral decay and cynicism bred by pervasive corruption. But the regime faces a dilemma. As one Russian, echoed by many others, observed to me, everyone in the Soviet retail trade is a thief, and you can't put them all in jail. The pragmatic policy of the authorities is to catch, expose, and punish the biggest illegal operators, so long as they do not embarrass the party directly, but to do no more than place obstacles in the way of the millions of small-time operators. In a way, one economist suggested, the authorities reluctantly tolerate the personal commerce of the little people as a necessary outlet for their consumer frustrations and a diversion from any more serious challenge to the system. The party knows, he reasoned, that people who are chasing after illegal goods in the counter-economy are not worried about reforms. Moreover, so long as the public takes the counter-economy as a necessary and desirable fact of life, there is scant hope of collaboration for strict enforcement. Inevitably, the Russians have a laughter through tears joke that conveys their fatalistic attitude towards corruption and makes a virtue out of this vice. I think, says Ivan to Volodya, that we have the richest country in the world. Why? Asked Ivan. Because for nearly 60 years everyone has been stealing from the state, and still there is something left to steal.